Hello, Joe Simhart here again. It's August 24th. Today's topic is some new thoughts on New Thought. And it was stimulated by one of my listeners who asked me to comment on New Thought and Mary Baker Eddy, the founder of Christian Science. She had written the influential book in the New Thought movement called Science and Health around 1875. And she was influenced by a character named Phineas Quimby. And Quimby was really the stimulant behind what we call New Thought. And he, in fact, didn't coin the word, but mentioned the word Christian Science as what he was using to help heal people. But Mary Baker Eddy, who went to Quimby for healing, for a backache or whatever, and seemed to have a miraculous result or felt much better after Quimby applied his New Thought technique, she searched the Bible and the scriptures and introduced a Christian version of New Thought, which was taken up by the Unity Church and a few others. And then there were other New Thought movements which followed Quimby more and kept it more at the human level and metaphysical level, so that the human positive thinking element could be enhanced through some metaphysical traits that we have. It doesn't have to be God. But in any case, there was a difference in the theologies, let's say, between Quimby and Eddy, and that has continued through the present. My interest in all of this New Thought came through my experience with Church Universal and Triumphant, or Summit Lighthouse, as they call it, back in the late 70s. The Summit Lighthouse believed in the connection and communication with ascended masters and gods and angels and a variety of metaphysical beings. They also picked up on quite a bit of theosophy as well as New Thought, and Christian Science was a big part of the teaching within the Church Universal and Triumphant. They considered Mary Baker Eddy an ascended lady master of some import, and they picked up on a lot of her terminology, like animal magnetism and malicious animal magnetism, which she borrowed from earlier followers of Anton Mesmer, who began this whole mess we call New Thought and metaphysical healing and whatever in his technique. So let's go back to Mesmer a second here. Mesmer believed that there was some kind of ethereal energy, magnetism, metaphysical magnetism that could be transferred between human beings and within the human body. And that if you kept a certain attitude or thought based on his suggestions, you could be healed of any number of illnesses. And he would do things like, he wore a cape at times and was quite a showman. People would sit around a vat of magnetized water, allegedly magnetized by him, and he would move these energies around with a kind of a wand that had a magnet at the end of it. You know, let's say this is the wand with a magnet, and he would wave this around and move these energies, and you know, and people would feel things, and they would shake and vibrate in their chairs and have thoughts that corresponded with this kind of suggestion that he would make. Well, you know, as time went on, even Quimby thought that Mesmer was more of a showman and tried to turn this into more of a metaphysical way of suggesting healing. In other words, the client would through his coaching, would take on the perfect mind, the mind of perfection, and would eliminate healing by negating it, by saying it didn't exist, more or less, and concentrate on the perfect body, perfect healing, prosperity or whatever that they seem to need. Mesmerism led to what we call hypnosis. Someone who was good at it and a colleague of Freud was Charcot, Charcot, and he would use hypnotism to cure people and seemed to have some results. Freud didn't like hypnotism. He felt that he saw the symptoms reoccurring in some other way. You might, just, for instance, suggest a way through hypnosis a particular kind of paralysis the person had, and it would kind of go away if it was psychosomatic. And then a person would end up with stomach aches, and then you would have to deal with that and deal with something else. So it was just like moving the problem around and not getting rid of it. So Freud started his long-term therapy, the talking cure, supposedly. But let's get back to this whole thing of suggesting, self-suggesting or auto-suggesting through new thought that you can heal yourself or bring prosperity to yourself and whatever. Mary Baker Eddy was maybe the most organized of the early New Thought practitioners, and her church is still thriving today to some extent and has some influence, for instance, through the newspaper, the Christian Science Monitor. There were critics of hers early on, including Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, who was a believer in mental healing to some extent, like a lot of people were back in his day, but he felt that Mary Baker Eddy went too far with it, and he criticized her character. Mary Baker Eddy came up with this idea of malicious animal magnetism in terms of her teaching when she had someone named Richard Kennedy who came as one of her students and helped her develop the business. And Kennedy was in another room or somewhere and doing healing that she was trying to develop, and she noticed that he was using his hands, on someone, and that was not allowed. This is supposed to be pure thought. The practitioner doesn't do that, and she literally, I read where she kicked him down the stairs as she did other students. She could be quite forceful physically in her attitude toward her beliefs, maybe even rigid. And how did she come up with them? Well, she basically did what scholars say tortured the Christian scriptures in order to get her ideas out of them and then put them into science and health. Taking quotes out of context, emphasizing certain teachings of Paul or whatever, and Jesus, and coming up with this radical dualistic mind-body, God, material world contrast, so that it became so extreme that it influenced even Course in Miracles, for instance, which the material world doesn't exist. Everything is the mind of God. There's no such thing as death. There is no such thing as sin. There's no such thing as illness. That if you take on the all-powerful mind of God in a perfect way, you will heal. It won't fail. If it does fail, you're not really a strong practitioner of science and health, or new thought. And so in a sense, either you could say God wasn't ready to heal you, or you can say you weren't perfect enough. So it often blames the victim. You doubted to some degree, and therefore you died of cancer, whatever. You can see why people might criticize this, but if you want to look at it more completely, the idea of a Christian science or a metaphysical science or science of the mind or whatever that appeared in the 19th century was really a reaction to the scientific method, which people were using with great success in many areas, and showing that maybe miracles are just made up or wrongly interpreted data, coincidences that people will say, well, I prayed and this person got healed, and they claim the prayer did it. But science was making great inroads into this kind of thinking. For instance, the idea of astrology and astronomy were once combined as a kind of a human science, but as the science began to sort out the weird metaphysics behind astrology and the mythology, and looking at astronomy, we have the science of astronomy, and astrology got left in the occulture dump, so to speak, even though it thrived among certain people, but not among scientists. Same thing with alchemy and the birth of the sciences of chemistry and biology. And for instance, alchemy got thrown into that pile of rejected knowledge. So there were many people that wanted to revive all of that, and New Thought was part of that revival of rejected knowledge and trying to apply suggestion and autosuggestion, hypnosis, if you want to call it that, or a perfect kind of prayer or communion with God in order to introduce a new way of healing, and assuming that this is the way Jesus and other great healers accomplished their miracles. So there remains a big controversy over this. All I know is that when I was practicing this stuff, we didn't use magic wands like Mesmer, but we used decrees and affirmations and aphorisms or whatever that are very common in New Thought ideas. And so that if you decree with your whole mind and your whole heart in a perfect way for health, it should come about. It could even protect you. The idea of this kind of new thought could protect you from, say, a bullet coming at you. It was that powerful to some people. Yes, when I think back, Mesmer's wand influenced a lot of what we have as like Harry Potter sorcerers, using their magic wand. And it was picked up by Disney, for instance, in The Sorcerer's Apprentice. You saw that idea. So you can go back, the magic wand goes back to Mesmer basically in our modern times. But so what is New Thought? New Thought kind of assumes that there is some kind of energy between us and God, and that we are, in a sense, gods within. We have a spark of divinity within us. And this is something which goes way back to the old Gnostic teachings, the radical dualists that interpreted the early Gospels in a very different way than what we consider normative Christianity, which developed and appeared and was set by St. Athanasius around the 4th century. We've been living with that normative Christianity, and we've been living with heresies and challenges to it, like Mary Baker Eddy's Science and Health. So what is going on here? Well, here I got a rock crystal, right? And we know what New Agers do with this. It has a special energy, and you can kind of infuse it with thoughts and from your mind, with the perfection of the universe or God's ideas or God's healing energy, and then the crystal will, in a sense, put this light back on here. Sorry.
66.
Whoops.
Right after this experience.
Forgive me. So the crystal would contain the energy, but if you just take the crystal away, so the energy is kind of in your mind, or you can produce it in your mind, or access it with that connection to that spark of God within. And that's supposed to take care of all this. Well, there's a lot of assumptions here. The assumption here is that there is a divine spark within us, and it's the same as that energy which created the universe. We can't really know that, but New Thought people claim they do know that in a very, what I consider, childish way. Whenever I've tested these ideas, and I practiced them back in the late 70s, decreeing and doing affirmations and whatever, and seeing if the energy worked, I noticed very quickly, within a year or two, that it didn't seem to be working. People practicing this with their whole heart and their whole mind and their whole soul seemed to be dying off and getting sick, just like everybody else around me. I've met people that believed, for instance, in Christian Science. I met this woman who was very critical, wanted to find out about my cult, and Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who she interviewed at one point and thought was legitimate, and wrote an article about it. And then people began complaining that, are you going to do an article and promote Jim Jones next, or some other cult leader? So she came to me, and she told me she was a Christian Scientist for years, and I was curious. She was ready to criticize Elizabeth Prophet, but not Christian Science. And so this writer, she had a column which was syndicated, so she was making quite a bit of money off of her climate column on women in religion, is what the title was. And I asked her, why is it that you believe in Christian Science? And she said, well, her young son at the time, he was a toddler, had a high fever that didn't seem to break, and she was afraid he was going to get brain damage or whatever, and the doctors didn't seem to help. And a friend of hers suggested to invite a Christian Science practitioner over. The practitioner came over, and within an hour, voila, the fever broke. And then she associated that healing of her son with the Christian Science practitioner who had come over. And I suggested to her, I said, why are you, and I used the word blame, why are you blaming that on Christian Science? And she kind of shocked, what do you mean blame? And I said, well, I basically mean associate the healing with Christian Science. Isn't it possible that it was a coincidence that, kids have high fevers that spike and they go away without a Christian Science practitioner? In fact, without much of anything but cold compresses in many cases. This is very common for children to have high fevers and whatever. Well, she thought about that, but didn't want to let go because there's an emotional charge when someone has their child healed or a friend healed in front of them. When someone like a metaphysical healer comes over, whether it's Reiki or Christian Science or Science of the Mind or a Unity practitioner or whatever, using this type of new thought or a kind of God energy healing, and something happens which seems to be a positive effect. So, yeah, there's a lot of problems with it. I certainly find other reasons why people heal. When they pray to saints and they heal, or have a Christian Science practitioner somehow through their thought transference or energy transference or God transference, have some kind of transcendent healing. Yeah, I'd be very careful with those kinds of healers. I think if you depend on them too much, if you overvalue them, you can overlook what common medicine can help to heal you. For instance, a simple antibiotic might save your child. When you avoid that kind of thing and you depend on a metaphysical healer and your child dies. Yeah, that's happened a lot, and a lot of those kind of healers have ended up in court for undue influence over a family that is somehow convinced to believe in that kind of thing. All right, I'll let it go at that, and I'll put on some links that you can look up. One of the pages that I looked at was called truthunity.net, that has some lectures, which are kind of reasonable, but promoting New Thought, and you can look at that in terms of how Mary Baker Eddy was influenced by Quimby and Mesmer and all of that stuff. Thank you for listening, and hope you guys have a good day.